Everyone. Welcome to Mar Dreamin'. All right, let's go ahead and kick things off. So this is a 25-minute session. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. I am super excited to kick off this session with our amazing speaker, Dani Reeve. So Dani's going to share some great insights on double dynamic content and how to add personalization to campaigns. And so with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off to Dani.
Thank you. My name's Dani. For those who don't know me, I work at Slalom. I'm super excited to speak with you today. Quick shout out to our sponsors. Without them, this would not be possible. There are some awesome names on this screen, and I really hope that you would check them out in your free time. A couple of housekeeping things. Again, my name's Dani. I work at Slalom. I have been on the account engagement, formerly Pardot platform, and Salesforce for about 6 years now, and been consulting for about 2.5 of those. My absolute passion is kind of bridging that gap between sales, marketing, and operations so that we stop having siloed departments in our companies we work with. So enough about me. Today we're covering dynamic content, so what it is, how to use it, and so on. And we will dig one level deeper to discuss advanced use cases. I like to call that double dynamic content. Our session's about 25 minutes long, so I might be speaking kind of fast. I apologize. I do want to work quickly to get through our content and hopefully address some questions at the end if time allows. And if you have any questions after the fact, I do have my contact information on the final slide. Without further ado, let's dive in. So the what? What is dynamic content anyways? Dynamic content is variable content that displays custom HTML on your website or account engagement forms, landing pages, layout templates, and emails based on prospect criteria, so field values. When a prospect matches the criteria, a variation of that content will display. In other words, save yourself and others the headache of maintaining multiple versions of templated content. Let's create one template and just have the content within it swap out as needed. As a marketer and administrator, I found this extremely helpful. There's nothing worse than logging into an org and there's 50 versions of a newsletter. It'd be awesome if we had one template and we could just kind of swap things out as needed. Now, double dynamic content. That's the ability to embed one piece inside of another. And so yay for advanced personalization. Imagine dynamic content on steroids. That's basically what dynamic content or double dynamic content is. It's the ability to nestle one piece within the other. It's the ultimate piggyback for the ideal marketing outcome. A feature such as this is not available to all kinds of Pardot users though. So it's important that we discuss accessibility. So the who can create this type of content? There's 3 buckets, either a Pardot administrator, a marketer, or a user with an applicable custom role inside of the platform to access that functionality. It's worth noting that a custom role would have 4 different options: view only, view and create/edit, view and delete, or all of the above. So you can really cater the needs based on the users in the org. So when should we leverage double dynamic content? So I've pulled 3 real world examples that I use all the time as a consultant with my clients. The first one is a salesperson and region. This is probably by far one of the most common combinations I see. Each sales region has their own sales team who shares a pipeline that can lead to forms, landing pages, and email content needing to cater to incentives or goals of that region, but then also list the contact information of their assigned salesperson at that time. As we know, sometimes salespeople switch up their the accounts they manage, and therefore the sales rep can change. So that's very important to incorporate into our content. The second one is product and language. So as sales and marketing organizations continue to expand globally, physically and digitally, The need for serving up content by product and language is skyrocketing. I don't know about you, but it was always frustrating to me when I shopped at IKEA and I received construction manuals in 10 languages. Think about how many trees we could save if I was able to tell them my preferred language and I only received one copy. Well, digital consumers feel the same way. They expect that your web pages, forms, and downloadable content can accommodate them based on their interests and their desired languages. Lastly, persona and sales stage. Last but not least, this scenario hones in on the ability to display content for specific personas and where they're at in their buying journey. I remind my clients all the time that sometimes a prospect falls cold not because they're uninterested, but because the messaging didn't speak to them as the correct audience. A C suite executive should not be receiving the same types of messaging as a low level manager. Well, I won't say never, but rarely. It's most definitely best practice to continue considering personas when developing your marketing content. I'd like to expand upon salesperson and region a bit. So, perfect use case, a prospect or prospective customer is receiving an e-newsletter that contains location-based contact information based on their state, as well as the account executive who's currently assigned to them. So we have a content block, which I'll call dynamic content one, the lower of the two. That's the salesperson's name. So we would house this in a field on a lead or contact, and that would populate there. Now we have placed dynamic content one inside of dynamic content two. Dynamic content two is variable based on location and phone number for that office. So note that one is inside the other. The reason why I called number one, one, even though it's inside of the other, is you always create the one going inside of it first, so that when you create the housing unit, you can place it inside of it. Or product and language. A prospective customer has requested a spec sheet download based on a universal website form. They've indicated that they're interested in product A as well as their primary language. So when we build the email to send them the spec sheet download, the content of the email itself is dynamic content two. That body content is based on their primary language. So in this case, English. Dynamic content one, which is placed inside of it, is the actual download button. That download button is variable, giving them the spec sheet they wanted, also in English. For persona and sales stage, a prospective customer served up an account engagement Pardot landing page that needs to contain content that is specific to their role at the company, as well as what stage their opportunity is in to ensure they are provided the proper incentives. I don't know about you, but as a consultant, I've run into many instances where a incentive or a promotion only applies to certain individuals in the pipeline or certain opportunity stages in Salesforce. So in this instance, the body of the landing page is showing a discount based on their opportunity stage. Now, in order to get that to populate, you would have to put their opportunity stage on their contact record. And then for dynamic content two, the body content is related to the persona. So that is showing, hello, C-suite executive, and kind of catering it to that level of content for that persona. If this was to a marketer or a sales rep at another company, the language would be totally different than for an executive level individual. So we're ready to pull the trigger. Where the heck do we build dynamic content inside of the Lightning app? So inside of the Pardot Lightning app, you will go to the Content tab. And then from the Content tab in the left-hand side panel, we will click on Dynamic Content. And you will click that blue Dynamic Content button to create the different content you need. You'll notice that on the far left side, there is a column called ID. When you are placing your dynamic content like in your email template, it unfortunately isn't going to have merge fields and have, the bracketed information say event promotion banner. Instead, it's going to have the ID. So this is where you could come back and say, did I place the right one? Jot down the ID number and make sure when you place it, you're placing the right one inside of the right other one. So you're probably asking yourself, when the heck is Dani going to get to the how and the why? Don't worry, we're getting there. Here is the how. So I have this sort of 8-step secret recipe for embedding dynamic content within existing dynamic content. So double dynamic. So first we're going to create our base template, our landing page, our form, our email, etc. We're then going to create dynamic content 1. Now, dynamic content 1 is the piece that goes inside of the other piece. So this is the nestled content. We're then going to create another piece of dynamic content and call this dynamic content 2. We're going to place dynamic content 1 and all of its variables inside of 2. Now you're going to hop back to your template. Now, when we are editing the body of the template, we are placing the link for number 2. We don't have to place the link for number 1 because we already placed it inside of number 2. Now we're going to test the heck out of it. Test it with different people within your organization. You can create fake prospect records and trigger emails to yourself to see how it works with different field values populated. When we are satisfied with how that looks, test it one more time for good measure, and then you can launch it. Now, why? Why would I use dynamic content? Why would I consider not implementing dynamic content? Are there any nuances? Well, let's jump in. So you should use dynamic content if your base template is the same, but your content's variable. So again, maintain one template with multiple subversions instead of 10 templates. You need to display text in multiple languages. We don't have to create a Spanish version and an English version and a French version. We can create one version and the language just flips dynamically. If you want to swap your imagery based on products or services of interest. I've also seen imagery swap based on location. So if someone lives in Michigan, show them the Mackinac Bridge. If someone is in New York, show them the skyline, things like that. If you're hosting global events and the invite is dependent on geographical location. So let's say you are hosting events on the same day in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. Based on where they live, you may choose to invite them to one or the other. So you could swap out that invite information accordingly. Signature line or contact information varies by salesperson or closest corporate location. Content is controlled by a specific buyer persona. So again, are they C-suite? Are they not? So this is where we could use job title fields or custom bucketed fields for different job titles equaling C-suite or manager or however. You need to display discounts or incentives for a specific subset of your audience, and content is controlled by user behavior. So if they looked at a certain page or not, if they filled out a certain page or a certain form or not, so on and so forth. And if your content can be paired with another at the same time, that's when we use double dynamic. So if we need to incorporate language and product of interest, let's marry them together. Now, there can be some troubles with dynamic content. This is straight from the Salesforce knowledge base. I do want to call these out. Order your variations by the restrictiveness of the criteria. If a prospect could match multiple, you have to make sure that they're seeing the first matched version or the one that you want them to be matched with. Only HTML is supported. CSS on the page where you embed your content could affect the content's appearance. That's a big one. That's why testing is so important. You can't use fields with the date field type as criteria. You would have to create plain text content in order to use it with text-only emails. So that's a big call out. And then lastly, like I mentioned a few moments ago, dynamic content merge fields in your email template when you're designing it displays only the ID for that piece of content. To make sure you're using the right merge field, You're going to have to go back to the list view of all your dynamic content and cross-reference the ID number on the dynamic content list view. So important reminders, so important. Double dynamic content needs to have fail-safe scenarios planned out, as well as some strategic implementation to ensure that our content's populating accordingly. As a consultant, I have had so many clients come to us and say, so I built it, it's not working, so-and-so seeing this and not this, or nothing's populating, why not? And that's, in those scenarios, it's often because there's not a default option. So if the language field is blank and we're trying to show a certain language in our template, what content would we show? So you might decide, we're global, but most people speak English, so let's have the default be English. That might not always be the case, though. Maybe it's German or French. So thinking through those default options, planning out scenarios ahead of time, like the kind of like poking the Swiss cheese method of which content may be missing. For example, if you're using a field that's only collected if they fill out a certain form, but you're sending an email to everybody, how can we ensure that as many people as possible are either people who filled out the form, or we are encouraging them to fill out the form as often as we can if they have not already? Place the dynamic content in a logical order. For example, create the dynamic content button and then the housing piece. And then keep Pardot field data in sync with Salesforce, especially if you're using a non-Pardot only field. If you're pulling something from a Salesforce contact, double check that field sync behavior, what system's overriding, which one's source of truth, who has access to edit that field. That's a big one. Can sales just decide to edit it and change the language because they feel like it? All things to think about. Double dynamic content could mean you have twice the marketing headache if you're not careful. Lastly, drum roll. Double dynamic content can only be nestled as 2 layers. So double dynamic, yes. Triple, maybe someday. Until then, I wish you all success and sincerely hope you found some applicable personalization use cases for implementing singular or double dynamic content. Thank you for joining. I have included my contact information, and it does look like we have some time, Joanna, if we'd like to address some questions.
Yes, thank you. That was some amazing content, Dani, and some really cool ideas. So definitely have my wheels turning. So yeah, we have about 7 or 8 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, you can type them in the Q&A tab. Mainly just compliments and people saying how awesome these solutions were in the session chat so far. So I haven't seen any questions come through during the session. So if anyone has any questions or wants, some advice from Dani, now is your time to speak up.
I see one from Nick that just came through. Have I seen a case where it fails after testing? I've never seen a case where it fails. I have run into situations where I've tested it, let's say on a Monday, everything's working. Maybe we don't actually send the email for 3 days. Since then, field data has changed. The Salesforce administration team has messed with the data that we were relying on. I've had things like that happen where then it fails, but it's not that it was working and then failed. It was that something situationally out of my control failed again. So, maybe that's a good learning point of, if we're going to test, make sure you test again right before launch. You can test it a week ahead if the content's done, but let's test it again the day of. And then I see Vera asked, what's our top usage, or what's a top usage case? Lately for me, so at Slalom, I tend to work with enterprise level clients, and a lot of them are global. So lately we have a lot of situations coming up where it is related to language. So they don't want to have 10 templates for Spanish and 10 templates for English and 10 for German. They want one that's just swapping out as needed. That's a huge one. Another one I would say is related to product interest, and then maybe the salesperson who's managing that account. Because again, if they're global companies, a someone might be assigned that account, but it's still like a selling team. So maybe you have an account manager and then some like sales specialists. So, you know, a lot of organizations appreciate having a field or something that's just swapping that out in the email of here's who you contact and here's their name and number, versus having to remember to go back and like hard code a new salesperson's subject line and signature line and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were a few questions in the main chat about seeing a demo. We only have 5 minutes left, so I don't know if you had anything handy to share, you could, Dani, but otherwise there is another question about specific.
I don't. I'll be honest, I went back and forth. I could talk about this all day. Unfortunately, with my schedule, I could only fit in the 25-minute slot. If I had a full hour, I would love to have given a full demo and like testing scenario. So maybe next year, you know, thank you for that input.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there's another one here about building dynamic content for days of the week and any recommendations for doing that.
So days of the week, meaning that you always have like certain content? Unsure what you mean by days of the week or use case. So I'll let you type again your thoughts. Let's see. When will dynamic content work in Lightning drag and drop email editor? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but there is a session, I believe later today, about roadmaps and such. So that would be a great thing to tune in for, maybe ask that question in that session. Therese says, Pardot Classic seems pretty limited on the fields available. Does Lightning offer more? Lightning does not offer more. The Lightning Builder itself, because it can be used by Salesforce, does offer other fields, but because you'd be using Lightning Builder for Pardot, you can still only access the like system fields. And then unfortunately, you can only basically mail merge in fields that are on a standard object, such as contact and lead. If you wanted to pull in like case information, that would be an instance that right now Pardot can't support that unless you were using a flow or something to put that data onto like the contact to utilize in other ways.
Yeah, this one here. So I tried to use dynamic content for a salutation based on time of day. Is there a way to do that?
Oh, like have a great Tuesday?
Well, there's the one, and then there's the time of day. So good morning versus good evening. And that would have to be based on the recipient's time.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's impossible. I just personally haven't done it. I could see that one having a large margin of error due to even user error. So that's one that I would really, really test a lot. I don't know if your business spans multiple time zones, but definitely something to consider. But that would be interesting. So if you do implement that, I'd be interested to hear how it goes. And I see Dave said something similar of good morning versus good evening. And then there was another comment about days of the week, like have a great Tuesday. So I would assume those work similar depending on how many time zones you're trying to accommodate. There's also that funky aspect of, let's say, perfect example, at Slalom, I'm based out of the Detroit location, but I work for the Minneapolis market currently. I'm serving a client in Minneapolis, which is a different time zone than Michigan. So would you tell me good morning if it was already noon in Michigan, but it's now still morning in Minneapolis? Like there's weird things like that. If I'm on vacation and got a good morning, but it's nighttime where I am, that could be kind of funky.
Yeah, these are great questions. So we're getting towards the end of our session, down to about 30 seconds left. So I think we can kind of wrap it up here, and just want to say thanks again to Dani. That was a great session. Feel free to reach out to her on the chat through Goldcast. And again, a special shout out to our sponsors. So feel free to, and please do pop by their sponsor booths sometime during the event. And check out our agenda for the next sessions on things like Einstein and identifying your ideal customers. So have a great rest of your More Dreamin', everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.